Welcome to Half Century Hangout, where different paths lead to the same table. I'm your host, John, joined by my friends and co-hosts, Luke and Chuck. We're three guys who grew up differently but became good friends with a lot to talk about. On this show, we bring our unique perspectives to the table and dive into everything from current events to life's big questions. We might not always see eye to eye, but that's exactly why we're here. To listen, to learn, and change our minds sometimes. So grab a seat and join us for honest conversation, unexpected insights, and a few friendly arguments. This is Half Century Hangout, where different perspectives make for better discussions.
Welcome back to the Half Century Hangout. So, what's been going on in y'all's world?
Just celebrated Mother's Day.
Yeah.
It was a great day to celebrate mothers. And
How did you and Kylie celebrate Lynn?
We celebrated by making supper for
Nice.
Lynn. Yeah, it was good. It was a good supper. Had steaks and
Dang. High roller.
pasta.
High roller over there, Luke.
Some
that gated community he lives in.
yeah, it was part of a quarter of a cow. I think you got a half of one, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
I did.
So
Yeah, we had a good time too. We had the kids over. Most of the kids. My daughter was unable to make it. My kids.
how was Becky over Mother's Day?
It was good. The kids came and took care of things. You know, I said my kids are old enough, and you know what? We decided it was time for them to step up, so they did.
Did they make you?
So they kind of. No, I still made breakfast.
Well,
I made
good.
Becky and I
That was
breakfast,
good.
which was good. They don't come over that early.
Oh.
So we did that, and then just kind of hung around. Really, the other thing that I have to add with all this is that the score is 1-0.
For what are you keeping score of?
Are you talking about a soccer game?
Popes from Chicago and Popes from Green Bay. 1-0, baby. Go Bears. Duh, Bears.
So one of the coolest things that after they announced Pope Leo the 14th,
Yeah.
they had a picture of him when he was a archbishop, I guess, in Chicago. They had a picture of him at a Cubs game.
Oh, that's cool.
It was a Sox game.
It was a Sox game. Yeah.
I thought it was a Cubs game.
No,
He's not a Cubs fan.
The
Oh,
Cubs.
shoot.
The Cubs
He's
claimed
Southside.
him.
They claimed him
but-
first, but he's not.
But it
He's
was
probably
actually
been
a
to one.
picture at
He's
a
probably
Sox
been to
game.
one, but it
Yeah.
was a Sox game. He was at the World Series in 05 when they won. He was in one of the games.
So do you know what his first profession was before he became even a priest? He was a teacher.
Yeah, he was
a math teacher.
mathematician. He was
Math
a
teacher.
mathematician from
And then
Illinois.
going to law school, and he decided to become a priest.
Yeah. I saw an interview where they interviewed his brother.
Yeah. Brother was a Catholic school principal.
Huh.
Mm-hmm. Retired.
I did hear that he
Principal.
made one of his first large decisions as Pope, and he said that it's called soccer now,
Not football.
not football.
I don't think that has anything to do with the faith. So I'm pretty sure he probably didn't do that.
You know, they had it on Sunday morning the other day where he said his brother was trying to call, and he finally picked up the phone. He's like, "Why don't you ever answer your phone?" That's his brother. It's hilarious. It's great stuff. It's super cool. I think the one thing that was neat that I was talking with my wife about was that I think sometimes here we always think that we're ahead of the game in America, right?
As
Like
Americans.
we're, the best, whatever. For the first time ever, we are having the discussions about one of our residents, one of our citizens being the Pope.
Yeah.
All these other countries have had this already. Like we think it's kind of cool. Like, oh, he's from Chicago. He's from, we're the last ones.
And like it's,
Right?
even
Because
if you're
it's
not
never been-
even
we've
if you're
never
not
had
Catholic, you're still involved in the conversation.
It's just hilarious. It cracks me
It's
up.
kind of fun.
Good stuff, though.
It is. It is good.
Yeah. Well, guys, I wanted to chat about something today that I think is extremely important, and that's kind of a big subject, but it's ethics. And I think before we even jump into this subject, that we got to be careful of on the front end is that we don't become like holier than thou or self-righteous, because it's easy to sit up on top of a mountain and point out the flaws of everyone else. But I just think it's a discussion worth having.
I'd like to start out with a question between you guys, and you answer it for me, because when we first talked about it, I think this is a very important piece of what it is what is the difference between morals and ethics? Okay. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times those terms are intertwined and used together. But John, what do you think? What would you say are the difference between morals and ethics?
Well, I think ethics are usually externally defined standards, and morals are kind of those personal principles we live by, those written on our hearts, morals, more than ethics, which are defined for us.
What would you say, Chuck?
Sort of similar to that, but maybe with a little nuance to it. I think ethics is a system that you enter into. Like there's an ethical system. Like, I don't know did you take ethics in college? Mm-hmm. I took ethics in college, and I didn't know, but I still don't know. I didn't really do the research on it, but is ethics a part of the philosophical school, John?
According to some, ethics is a part of philosophy.
Yeah.
Philosophy that we kind of live by.
So I think ethics is kind of this overarching thing. I don't even know really what word to give to it, but then morals hold up ethics. So it's like the morality would be a pillar that holds up ethics. I don't know if that's the right way to look at it, but that's kind of the way I've always thought of it.
Well, I mean, that's fine. It's what you think. That's why I asked the question, because I think that everybody looks at it a little different. I've really always looked at it like ethics are extrinsic and morals are intrinsic.
Yep.
So the morals come from
what John
within,
said.
And the ethics are placed there by something or someone or whatever it would be. That's kind of the way that I've always looked at it. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily disagree with the fact that you said that your morals may uphold the ethics that you live by.
Right.
But I think that sometimes we might get stuck somewhere. I mean, not me. It's never necessarily happened to me, but if you joined or you had a career path that somehow your morals didn't line up with the ethics of that organization, might be a little problem.
Well, and we talked about values. I think values are a part of that conversation too. What are our values? How do they match what the company's values are?
So,
and how does that intertwine with the ethical decisions that we make as we go along?
So I think there's like a system of ethics with each different little thing. So like, I think the medical field has a system of ethics, like the Hippocratic Oath, right? I think education has a system of ethics.
Business ethics, medical ethics.
Correct.
Educational ethics.
Yeah. But I think within those, you still have honesty.
Sure.
So as you look at, and as you introduced it, as we were going to talk about morals, how do you see morals playing out in this environment that we talk about? Where do morals come in? Where do you see it being important? Where do you see it having the most impact? What do you see with that?
So I think there's this perception that the ethics of a country or the ethics of a, city or whatever has been declining over the course of time.
The ethics are, or morals are?
Well, I thought we were talking about ethics.
I think morals are harder to define for me.
I think because they're different for everyone.
Right. And so we might say the morals are declining.
Like if there's a moral decline, a lot of people would say it that way, because at least the way that I look at it, it's hard for me to say that there's an ethical decline, because the ethics aren't derived from individuals. Yeah. They're derived from some group, whatever that is.
They're defined
so the
by
morals,
someone else.
Now you might say, like you said, if there's a moral decline, like we've heard that word, we've heard that term. Mm-hmm. I mean, my dad used to say that, right? Like there's a moral decline. Do I think that there's a moral decline? I think I would probably throw the question back and say, how would you even measure that? How would you look at it and determine if you think there is a moral decline? How would you, what would your indicators be that there is a moral decline?
So maybe that's the question is, do you guys think there has been a moral decline in the last 20 to 40 years?
Go ahead.
I think that's where we need to be careful, because that's a judgment. That's a judgment call. And I think that each generation may think that there's a moral decline, maybe because it's different than what they were taught or grew up, or what the morals were at the time that they were in. The world's different.
Let me push back on that just a little bit. I think it's okay to make a judgment call.
Okay.
I think we can judge whether something is moral or not moral based upon an objective truth. But I think where we kind of get things a little bit hairy is when we start condemning people.
Generation or people.
Correct.
Okay.
I think that the word that I struggle at, and I realize it's a semantic kind of debate, it kind of lends itself to that, that if you're talking about a moral decline, does that mean there's less morals, or that the morals that are in place don't live up to what we think they should be in the what they mean, or what the meat of them is? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's probably both.
Is the bar lower, or is everybody going under the bar?
Because I think that's where the judgment piece that I would struggle with comes with a little bit, is that let's just say that you have this moral, whatever it is. Let's just say that it's trustworthiness. Let's just say something like that. Okay. And I believe that it's also a moral that I would have, but there's people that would say, well, trustworthiness means you're telling the truth. You're doing these things, right? You're honest. You're open. You're constantly telling people the right things, the real things. You're not, whatever. Do the people that say, oh, well, you know what? I didn't lie to you. I just didn't tell you that part. Like a lie of omission, right? As we call that. Is that a lessening of that moral compass? Is that a lowering of the bar? Or is it the fact that maybe you have 3 morals where you have trustworthiness, something else, and I only have 2? Is that a moral decline? You know what I'm saying? That's 2 different things to me.
Yeah. I think I know what you're trying to
toss out there. Why don't you explain that?
See,
what do you think he means for me?
Yeah. So what I think he means is are there fewer morals that people are living by, or are there this set of morals that have been set up by this objective truth, and people are failing to reach that? Is that kind of what you're saying?
It's 2 things. It's either it's a level of the number of morals you would have, or that you uphold,
right?
Or is the meat of that moral being degraded somehow,
right? To
the point now that it doesn't mean what it meant 30 years ago. Yeah. That's kind of what I would lean more toward a little bit, just personally. And John, I think you alluded to it, is that over the years, over generations, something 50 years ago probably meant something different than it does now. I mean, let's just take an example of the news, okay? 50 years ago, people would watch Walter Cronkite and believe everything that he said, because you know what? It was factual. It was boom, boom, boom. That was it.
He had a reputation.
Yeah. That's what everybody
Do you know when that changed?
When did it change, John?
1979. I just heard a story on this. It was Simon Sinek was talking on his podcast, and he said in 1979, I think it was David Koppel was covering the Iran hostage crisis, and they figured out that, wow, if you had a good story, you could get viewers on that.
Right.
So now that what Walter Cronkite did was report the news, because it was free air, CBS, ABC, NBC, they got free air time because they were reporting the news.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now the news channels
monetized.
started to, exactly.
Yeah.
They started to monetize it. So now what you see is one side or the other, right?
So if I'm looking at that from a moral compass, if I look at it and I say, back then, people put a lot of weight into what they believe to be the absolute truth. All right. Now, I think that people don't necessarily put that much weight into it because they can look at this thing, 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 and they can form their own kind of thing, which might have its merits, which I think is a different discussion. But I think that lessens the impact of what that moral that people 50 years ago held.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of the way that I look at it.
Yeah, I think if I hear you right, and I've been using this word objective, I think that there's this thing where people don't believe there's an objective way to do things anymore. There's not an objective truth to live by. There's all these little, subjective things that, okay, if I don't, I can lie about things if I want to, because if this person disagrees with me or condemns me or holds me accountable for that lie, then I've always got this person to uphold and encourage me. So I think it can be a slippery slope in that judgmental and condemning type of thing that you're talking about, John.
The world was somewhat more black and white, and it's become a lot more gray. And you have to learn how to discern what the truth is, or what's right and what's not. I mean, what's being reported.
I think a lot of times people say, you know how kids hate it when we say back in the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think what we look at our age is that we seemingly, at least for myself, look back and everything seemed much simpler.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we look at that, sometimes I think that is what lends itself to that conversation of the moral decline, because we were able to identify things back then, like you said, John, more black and white, like we could put this here and put this here. Now it's more complex.
Mm-hmm.
Our world is ever changing, which again, this isn't a bad thing. It's just that it's adjusting what I think morals, if people were looking at it, where it's going. I think that people our age generally would say, I know there's some research about it. I know you probably have some numbers with it, but I think that people our age would probably say that there's a moral decline just because of the look of it, just because they see all this stuff going on that never happened before. When was the first time that you ever saw on a TV show a man and a woman sleep in the same bed, whether they were married or not? It was the Brady Bunch. Everything else, Lucy and Ricky, Mary, all of them, they were all separate. It was the
Fred
separate
and Wilma.
beds. Yeah, they were always separate beds. It's so much different if you look at the moral side of things and what people put up as their morals.
Would you say that there are people living today who have less morals, or that they just aren't living up to the morals that have been expected of them? I mean, what's your thoughts on that? And how do you put meat to those bones?
The morals maybe are different. I don't know if you could say it's a decline or an increase, or how do you measure that decline? I think that's what Luke said. How do we measure that decline? And then we can say, okay, yeah, there was a decline, or no, there's not a decline in the way that we are treating each other or whatever. I mean, is that how you're going to define it? Or is it defined by whether you show up to work on time? Is it defined by how you make your money? Is it defined by whether companies are socially responsible or not? Is it defined by how you are preserving the natural resources we have. So how do we define that moral decline?
Mm-hmm.
I think the one thing that we can look at is that morals can vary from one person to another.
Yeah.
So when you ask that question, are they getting less? I think what the question that I have behind that is that as time goes, all right, so over the last 50 years,
Mm-hmm.
as the times have changed, should that change, or is it okay that the moral, the way that we view the actual moral, has changed and adapted with the change in times? Because I think that it's kind of like, I could use an example of, I'll just use an example of the Bible, okay? When the Bible was written, it was in its first version, right? It was here in the languages that it was written in Hebrew and all the things that it was written in. As time went and people, translated it and moved it into their languages and doing it, the stories changed a little bit. Sometimes the versions as they came through, the story itself really didn't change, but maybe the way that it was told, they changed some words to make it easier for people to understand it as time went. Sometimes as a preacher, I'm sure that you have to use a story from the Bible in a way and move it a little bit to help people understand the concept of it.
And that's the key, I think, is what drives the morality of the Bible is the objective truth that's hidden within the stories.
And I think that that's what I'm trying to say is that the morals, if you just use one, we'll use the same one we used before, which is truth. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a moral, right?
Right.
The idea of truth is the same. Okay. But the moral, as somebody now might view it, might be a little different than the way that they viewed it 50 years ago, even though the center truth is still there. It's still the same thing. I guess the question for me would be is, do people now, younger than us, 1 or 2 generations below us, do they look at that absolute truth the same way? That's where I would say no.
That's where I would say no too.
I would say that it takes a different look because I think that the focus has changed from kind of where morals used to be this real positive, bring people together, happiness, be kind to people, that kind of thing. And I think that has changed a little bit to the point that maybe it's not just our focus on those morals, but it's focusing on different ones because the times have changed so much.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you really think that the times have changed that much?
No, I think that's, I read an article before we actually started this that you have actual behavior based upon perceived behavior. And the perception of decline was way higher than what the actual decline is, according to a Gallup poll that was released in 2023.
But what's the decline that they're measuring?
Yeah, and it doesn't.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it doesn't really get into a whole lot of that, but it was just saying the perception of decline of the majority of the responders was higher than what the actual behavior was, despite those perceptions. It seems to have remained stable over time, as opposed to getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse.
And I would probably tend to agree with that only because I think that it's not necessarily that it's declining. It's the way that we're viewing it.
Yeah.
Because we're viewing it through a different set of eyes because the times have changed.
Yeah.
Our lens is different.
Yeah.
You bring
Our
up
perception is different.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
And you bring up an interesting point, though, when you talk about, you mentioned absolute truths. Like, what is it that is driving morality among, us or among current generations? Because you brought up the Bible. There are truths that are found in that Bible that I think people have, lived by and died for over the years. But back in the 1800s, there were people who had the same color skin that I have that were using the Bible to justify slavery,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think one of the things for me that I look at as to where, like you said, where do those absolute truths come from, or where do your morals come from? I'm a pretty firm believer that many of those things are taught to you from a very young age, from your family, from your parents, from your grandparents, from church, whatever it is, but from a very young age.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that over the years, as time has gone, as we know, there's been, a lot of research done on it, but there has been a breakdown of what the family may look like compared to what it did 50 years ago, most of the time.
Yeah.
And so those breakdowns have, I think, personally affected the way that the morals are being taught or handed down to people that are younger than us, because the world's not the same, and the makeup of the families and the way that things are is not the same. There's great research done on how different it is now with the 2-generation, 3-generation interaction among families, how it's much less now than it used to be, because a lot of times maybe there's distance between the youngsters and the grandparents, or the grandparents aren't involved in the lives as they were when we were younger, or those types of things, where that has changed that interaction, where those values and where those things, I said values, where those morals come from. Because I think that's important. I think that it happens more. I think that the family unit is a large portion of where at least your initial morals come from and what your base is, like what your base is. And then as you get older, we all know, you kind of take your own path and you do your things, but it's still there. And then it's passed on again from you onto your kids, your grandkids, those things as you go. So,
and we've talked about that, and you talked about generations not being together. We have so many generations in our workplace now, up to 4 generations in a workplace. How does that affect maybe the ethics? And people of some generations may think it's okay not to show up to work on time. I don't know.
Yeah.
People of some generations may think you got to be there and you got to punch in at the exact time.
If you're not 15 minutes early, you're late.
If you're not 15 minutes early, you're late. And there are some people, and there are some cultures too, because I've worked with some
on
of
both
those
ends
cultures,
of the spectrum,
absolutely, that are and you're there 15 minutes early and you're waiting to punch in until that second turns.
Yeah.
Rather than taking an extra 15 minutes to punch in. And
I also think, before we kind of end this discussion, I also think that there's a facade of morals. Like everybody back in the 1950s thought that was the golden era, right? But there was a lot of crap going on. It wasn't the best for everyone.
100%. And that's, I think that's universal. I think it's universal through time. It is now. I mean, there's people now that think this is the best time of anything, the glory age of technology or whatever you want to say.
Or the 80s or the
everything has its positives. Every generation, every decade, every century, whatever you want to go by, everything has its positives, but everything also has its negatives.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that's human nature, that we want to remember the good times, not as much the bad times.
Well, my point in bringing that up is that you can appear to be, that perfect family, right? You got the house with the white picket fence, you pay your taxes on time, you got the kids and grandkids, and, everything looks picture perfect, but behind that
isn't a great picture.
Could be just a facade. Yeah. And I think sometimes our culture gets tricked into thinking that because there's this moralistic facade that exists.
I think what you're talking about is we write our own story. Throughout life, we have to write our own story. Sometimes those stories aren't quite Maybe they're fish stories. I don't know. You ever told a fish story? Does the fish get bigger when you catch it? I'm not a fisherman.
So you're thinking that behind some of these good old stories that we've talked about, that the fish is a little bit bigger than what it actually was.
Or we are... we're omitting some of the things that we don't want people to know.
Or maybe even forgetting some of those things.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's the other part of it, is that when I was mentioning that before, how people look back on things and we concentrate on the positives at our age. I know for me, for sure, there's parts of it that you forget. Mm-hmm. But generally speaking, what are the parts that we forget? The negative parts.
Yeah.
Because it's easier or cleaner to forget the negative parts than it is the positive parts.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to really remember the negative if you don't have to.
Well, it casts us in a different light when we're telling those stories, right?
Well, 100%.
And we might be wired that way. Human beings might be wired that way.
Yeah.
Not sure, but I think we are.
I do think the one part that I just want to throw in the last part that John mentioned, and he said something about the morals and how we act, right? That back up what our morals are, right? We talked about this with values a little bit. I think that the gray aspect of morals, I think, can get you in trouble, because if you're really not defining your morals, I think that you're kind of giving yourself an out. You know what I mean?
Sure.
You're building yourself a trap door or an escape door that, I really didn't mean that. I meant this.
Yeah.
You're really not being truthful with yourself.
So in your mind, if you can define and list out the morals that you want to live by, mm-hmm. whether they be few or many, then it's setting you up for like more success.
Yeah. Your morals tend, not all the time, but tend to drive you in a certain direction toward what career you would choose, because you want to align what you believe in with an organization that has ethics like this. Mm-hmm. Or whatever it is, because that's a little bit of a problem if your morals don't line up with that. Like you said, they're like pillars that are holding it up, right? Mm-hmm. So if they're not lined up with that, it could make things difficult for all those that are, that may listen to the podcast that are younger and looking for careers. I think it's an important thing for you to do, is to be able to look at, as a human being, as a person, to be true to yourself and your morals, to say, what do you guys do? What's your moral compass? What's your ethical, structure?
Right. Yeah. I think that's a really good point to be made.
Got a quote for us?
When wealth is lost, nothing is lost. When health is lost, something is lost. When character is lost, all is lost.
That's a doozy.
I think character.
Danger, Will Robinson. Danger.
Yes. Well, hey, thanks for hanging out with us here at Half Century Hangout. Be sure to like us on your favorite podcast app, and we'll see you next time.
Peace out.
The Bears.